I fall in love really easily. And my first true deep love was my 5th grade teacher. And when I got appendicitis, she came to visit me, and that's when I realized it was mutual. But it didn't work out. But I do want to tell you about 3 women that I do love: Jacqueline, Michelle, and Bernice. Jacqueline's my wife, and she's tall, she's brilliant, she's beautiful, and it's hard for me to convince her of any of that. But she is constantly bombarded with males complimenting her on her appearance. Excuse me. A few years ago, she was working with a little boy. She's a school social worker in Glens Falls. So these are the males that compliment her. They're first graders. And she, like most of us, likes a compliment. So when a little boy said, "Mrs. Tyner, you used to be a ballet dancer, didn't you?" she immediately thought, maybe I'm slender, graceful. So as a social worker, she knew to ask for more. She said, "So what is it about me that makes you think I danced ballet?" He said, "Well, when you walk, your feet go out like this." And so the compliment was gone. And another little boy was in a bad mood, and she was trying to bring him down a little bit, calm him down. And he said, out of the blue, he said, "All right, Mrs. Tyner, what did you do before you were a teacher?" She said, "Well, what do you mean?" "You know, what was your job before you were a teacher?" And she said, as a therapist would, "Well, what do you think I did before I was a teacher?" He said, "I know, clown with all those teeth." She has a large, beautiful smile. But the third boy spoke of her appearance. He met her in the hallway after vacation, and he was so thrilled to see her that he walked up to her, and he's this tall, so he put his arms around her and he hugged tight, put his head against her, and then he looked up and he said, "Mrs. Tyner, you know you have skinny parts and squishy parts?" And she pushed him away and decided he was too old now to be hugging anymore in the hallway. So I try that line with her sometimes, like, "Babe, you've got skinny parts and squishy parts," and it doesn't help with me either. So it was quite a juxtaposition when last winter I found myself in Mass General Hospital with her, cutting her long hair down so it was just above her scalp, and then holding her hand as they did a lumbar puncture to see if the leukemia that she'd been diagnosed with had invaded her spinal column. And then to watch as they poured toxins into her body to destroy her immune system. This beautiful, strong, vivacious woman, she just shriveled over a period of days and weeks. And I was lucky enough to spend the time with her. I sat in her room, in her hospital room. They gave me a bed, so I stayed right there for a full month. And I remember one night just looking out over the city of Boston, and it was beautiful. The stars were out and the lights of Boston were out. And I turned and looked at her, and she was asleep, and she had pain on her face. Her forehead was furrowed, and that was her sleep. That was her escape. And I got up, and I left the room and walked down the hall, and I'm all alone, and I'm just thinking about my wife and praying to God that He would just take her because she was in so much pain. And I walked down the hall, and I looked out a window on the other side of the building, and I was confronted with the other side of the hospital, and I could see floor after floor after floor. And the windows were all, no blinds, and I could look in and I see person after person after person in similar situations. People sick, people with their families there. And I just thought, this is a hard life. How do you move on through things like this? And the story is not unique to me, it's not unique to Jacqueline. We all know people, we all will have people we love who live through hard times. And it brings me to the point of the talk, which is resilience. That's one of the elements of grit, is resilience, being able to move on. And it makes me think of, by the way, she is doing well. She came through the transplant quite well. Initially, they'd given her about a 10% chance of surviving. So we were planning her funeral together. She made it through. She's home now. She's doing well. But she never got bitter, and She was never depressed. She just kept a positive attitude and said, I don't know if I'll live or if I'll die, but if I do live, I want to keep on living, not just staying alive. And that's sort of how she's been since then. And I wonder, what is it about her that makes her press on? And it reminded me of the first time that I ever met her family. So this is the second woman I want to talk about, her sister Michelle. Michelle is nothing like Jacqueline. Michelle's 6'3", 350 pounds, developmentally disabled quite significantly. But the one thing she does know how to do really well is to figure out what will make people the most uncomfortable in the room and do it. So I went to meet Jacqueline's family after we'd gotten engaged, which is sort of an awkward situation because they want to know who is this guy that is going to spend the rest of his life with our sister, our daughter. And so you're there to sell yourself. And she has 75 siblings. They're Irish Catholic. They're all over 7 feet tall. When they sit down to have a meal, they have a beer in each hand and they're loud, which was perfect because I could shrivel into the corner and sort of be inconspicuous. But they are Catholic, and so when my brother-in-law said grace, for a split second afterward, it was quiet. And in that quietness, Michelle leaned out over the table and looked down at me and said, So, Randy, are you sleeping with my sister? And if it was a movie, it would have been a still frame with everyone looking at me and just the sound of my heart beating. And I leaned out and I said, Not yet, Michelle, but I can't wait to. And all the siblings and the mothers breathed a sigh of relief and laughed and went on with their eating. But I watched her mother, that's the third woman, Bernice. I watched her at this meal, and she was so happy. She's a widow. Her husband had died, but she was so happy, laughing and talking and bringing out big vats of chowder and cutting up homemade bread. She was a delightful woman, and I got to know her over the course of my life. She always looked that way. She was always gracious and giving. And if you looked at her, you'd think, wow, this woman has had an easy life. She's contented. Then I got to know her life. Bernice was born in Pennsylvania in a poor family. When she was 9, her mother got cancer, and Bernice had to take over a lot of the household chores. She made bread before school, so her family would have bread to eat in the evening. When she was 16, her mother died. When she was 17, a knock came at the door, and it was somebody from the coal mine who said, I'm really sorry, but your brother was just killed in a coal mining accident. She had a boyfriend. That took her away from her family. She finally had something positive in her life, but World War II came. He went off to the war, and he wrote her letters saying that it was over. Partly, I think he didn't want her to be a widow or to be mourning, so he cut her free. At 19, she met another guy, fell in love, got married. On their first month anniversary, they were out together, and on their way home, got in a car accident, and he was killed. And she crawled 3/4 of a mile to a house, knocked on the door in the middle of the night, and they took her in. She picked up the pieces, and she moved on. James came home from the war. They got married. They had 3 beautiful boys. And James, Patrick, Vince, and Dennis. And one night when her husband came home from work late at night, he came in and he went to kiss their 2-month-old baby, Dennis, goodnight, and Dennis was cold and had died of SIDS. So here's this woman. She's lost her mother, her brother, her first husband, her baby. She's lived in poverty her whole life. Eventually, she had more children. One of them was Michelle, who was pretty significantly developmentally disabled and was an enormous amount of work to take care of her, and pain. One day, Michelle came home from school, and she was crying, she was hysterical, and blood was running down her legs. And they finally calmed her down, and Bernice said, Michelle, what happened? And apparently some neighborhood boys had been picking on her and throwing rocks at her legs because she was developmentally disabled. Those are the things that Bernice had to deal with. So when I met her on that day, and I thought, this woman is just so kind. I love her. We did. We fell in love. We had a great relationship. But I don't know how she did it. Because when I think of grit, I think of people becoming tough as leather, hard as nails, and gritting their way through. somehow she went through life with all that pain and maintained grace and hope and optimism and joy. I have no idea how she did it. But when I look at my wife today and I see her living like that, I think maybe it's something that my wife Jacqueline learned from her mother, from the way her mother modeled it. And my hope is that as teachers, we can influence our students a little bit by letting them see us, letting them see our lives, and when we do encounter pain, modeling what it is to get up and move on and come to school and be hopeful. Because in the end, I think that is probably our biggest influence on them, is who we are, not just what we tell them. Thank you.